going to keep the pace going, so I will very, very quickly hand over to Heiko, who is going to lead this panel on biodiverse production systems. This is about how we successfully transition from intensive extractive farming systems into more organic, regenerative systems with biodiversity as its core. No further explanation from me. Heiko, I'll hand over to you to introduce the panel and take it away.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, we have a range of specialists on the panel, particularly diving deep of having lots of experience in this way, but also I think you're seeing what I'm seeing. Yeah, five male people. We managed to.
I have 6 daughters.
But we managed the age range more or less, but the gender is something as well. Apparently not so many yet farmers in the field. But we also, due to the COVID, we had invited Gunhild Stordalen for our workshop, as well as Lisa Drew, who couldn't come up, because there's been some remarks on this. So, thanks to the 6 daughters, we're sort of slightly getting into it. I'd like to kick off the discussion with Benedikt Bösel. Benedikt is the founder and CEO of Gut&Bösel. And you started some time ago with the transition already at your farm, I think about 4 years ago. So you could start a little bit how you got into that transition, but also sort of embrace the role of trees. I know it's very important to you, and it's been discussed in the forum in the breakout earlier. And where do you see it going in the transition?
And speak loudly, please, panel, so that we project to the whole room if we're not using microphones. Thank you.
Right, perfect. Well, thanks all. Many thanks for the introduction, and many thanks obviously to all the organizers. I think you've done an incredible job, and I'm very grateful to be here. So I had a prior life in the banking industry, and then towards the end in venture capital, where I was specifically had a focus on agriculture technology, so agtech. And this is really how I understood that my biggest task is not, being a cool, intelligent, smart, supposed to be investor and try to figure out which technologies can be great or not, but to go through what I can offer most, which was the land and the farm. So this is why I decided to go back home and took over responsibility of our family farm. And in the beginning, because coming from the tech side, I thought, technology and innovation and digitalization, that is the key, and that will save us all. And I was in contract with a multinational corporate of having a 1,000-hectare ecological farm, 1 hour outside of Berlin, bringing all the technology in there, all the digital tools, and have this as a place where people come and see and experience and visit and so on. And while we're talking about it, I always looked out the window and I saw that our incredible sandy soil and this incredibly low precipitation, which makes growing things, be it forest, be it plants, incredibly tough. I thought, this has nothing to do with the kind of technology and the projects that we are discussing. And I realized that the problem is that we, in many cases, if not most cases, are developing technology and innovation in the agriculture space or with regard to land use that are coming from an understanding of exploitative ecosystem, so horizontal monoculture, 1 harvest per year. If this is what we're looking at, the innovation will always be only able to reduce the negative outcomes of the production model. But if we want to develop in a way that we desperately have to, meaning we have to take care of health, biodiversity, climate mitigation, education, all of these topics, rural development is a very important one. In fact, we have to take a step back and look at the root causes of the problems and decide, well, how do we change our system to not be faced with the negative outcomes in the first place. And this is really how the journey started. So I wrote thousands of emails and looked at thousands of models of other farmers and other NGOs and scientific community all across the world to see what have they tried out, what are different systems, what are different approaches. And then through that I basically discovered the world of regenerative farming, and what sort of was then my next step was to say, well, our biggest problem is the sandy soil and the low precipitation, and there's some forecasts that say in 20, 30 years we won't even be able to grow grain anymore. which today is what we basically live from. So I said, okay, if this is the case, then why not bring all the different forms of regenerative agriculture to this area and show, or try to implement them, develop them, and prove over a certain period of time that they are in fact economically, ecologically, and socially beneficial to the current conventional organic models that we have, or that we are looking at the moment. And this is really how the journey started, and this is really, to be honest with you, it changed my life, because I understood I have this unique opportunity to show this and to be able to basically facilitate this. And yeah, from there a lot of things happened, but I think I'll keep them because we have these amazing people here also, and they want to say something.
Yeah. Felix, you are the chairman of the board of the German Federal Organic Food Industry. That's a big organization, and you have been in the industry for long. You've also set up a couple of farms. Like to sort of encourage you to bring the German understanding of it into it, and as well your personal. We talked in the call before about the conditions of the system that have to change, and also about what is the issue in society as such. How do we address it in society?
Thank you very much. And thank you very much that I have the opportunity to be here. It needed some conviction, but now I'm here. I'm very happy. Two things. First, the organization I'm head of is an umbrella organization in Germany. Our members are associations of organic farmers, food producers, and traders, and our task is to represent that sector on federal level in Germany. And the second, I didn't set up many farms, just one, which was quite challenging enough. I took it over in '86 and turned it to organic in '92, and I handed it over to the next generation 6 years ago. So you see the Altenteil, however you call that in English. We are facing so fundamental problems when we are talking of climate change and biodiversity losses and soil fertility problems and aquatic ecosystems. I mean, this is so incredibly urgent that the question is now, is it enough to change the little world we are changing organically? It's very encouraging that we meet more and more consumers who want to buy organic. We increased organic from the time when I converted from 2% to 10% in Germany now. The European Commission declared in their farm to fork strategy that they want to have 25% organic in 2030, which is quite ambitious because we have something like 5% all over Europe right now. But even if we get there, can we sit down and say, okay, we have 25% where everything's smooth now, but the rest? So this observation gives us the question, what is our role in this transition? Because I don't believe that we can be those who will be the 100% people, because 100% of the consumers will buy our products for deliberately for a higher price. And I think that we have to do both. We have to create the frameworks in a way that especially the costs are telling the truth, which would mean that only very rich people would afford conventional products. That's one thing. And our role is to trample the path that could become the road for everybody, which is quite ambitious enough, but that's what we will have to do. This means developing best practice, like what you are doing there. It means give people good training, which they don't get right now, which means to invest money in research on systemic questions and not in small specialized silos of narrowed views like the tunnel view on the genome was what we are investing our money in right now.
So you touch upon as well the systemic way of changing, system thinking approaches and so on. Do you see that at least being discussed? Apparently not yet lived in the same in terms of research, and there's a couple of farms to explore and sort of exchange ideas, but do you see that on the agenda coming up?
As for research, it is discussed, of course. Everybody's talking about interdisciplinary research. But if you look close, the professors who do it, you will maybe object, but most of them sign that in the contract to get that money, but then they try to stay away from the others as far as possible. And this is due to the incentive system very much. The incentive for researcher is writing articles in peer-reviewed journals and being cited by people who do the same narrow things. And as soon as you start spending your time in writing articles for farmers, you lose credits. And so this is a very, very difficult story. And anyway, it could not end with doing interdisciplinary research. We need transdisciplinary research. We need farmers, researchers who work on eye-to-eye level with farmers. Because there's so much creativity out there. Not only farmers, food producers, food transformers as well. And we need to get what they do scientifically worked on. Because what Benedikt does at his place, when it comes to the harvest, there's so much rush, you will forget to weigh and to count, and unfortunately afterwards you don't know what this plot better than this one. And the problem is, if you want to upscale what you're doing, you need some sort of scientific validation. And it's too much asked to him to do that. We would need public money in research to be invested on that. So that was very,
That would be the ideal world, so that if you had the money in research to more observe farms.
No, sorry, we don't need money on people much, don't we? We don't need money only, we need structures.
Yeah. Okay.
The problem is, right now, if you would pour 2 billion euros on the German agricultural research landscape for systematic organic research ideas, it wouldn't affect anything because you don't have researchers to work with that, and not the institutions, the institutes to work with that. So that's a long way to go.
So it's a lot about the mindset as well, of the contextuality. That's how do you try to integrate that? Well, thank you. Edward, you represent academia in this panel at the moment. You're professor at the laboratory in the University of Neucha, soil and biodiversity. So you know not much about soils, you know the problems that Benedikt is facing, but also you know the situation of academia and the research stuff. Maybe sort of directly in response to Felix, what is your position from the university side?
I think your analysis is totally correct, unfortunately. The way the academic system works, the professor is selected not based on his or her capacity to reach out and to do transdisciplinary research, but to publish a lot of papers in high-ranked journals. That's really the fact. And so the way we select our candidates, unfortunately, leads to the situation where it is, where we're now. So we really need to change this. And there's a lot of talking about doing more interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research. You see a lot of this in calls for funding. But then when you try to do this, or when you see the results of which projects are actually funded, you realize that we're not there yet. So there's still a lot of way to do. I think there's incentives, but it's really hard to move or to change the system. So And the other thing is, I mean, I'm here because I engage in, of course, politics because of this initiative. I also like to, but this is not something that most academics like to do. We are best at doing what we like to do best, which is just focus on a very narrow field of research where we can efficiently publish a lot of papers in high-ranking journals. And so as soon as you move out of your field of your comfort zone, well, I can't not do this because this is how I function in my mind. I can't prevent myself from engaging in all kinds of directions, which leads me to, of course, publish all kinds of stuff in all kinds of journals, but also to meet lots of people, and this is for me intellectually stimulating. I also have the feeling now that I've started since a few years to work on pesticides and see the debate that we really need to engage as scientists, because the debate is so biased. Especially you have these big agrochemical companies who have so much money. Somebody told me the other day that Nestle has 600 people just checking social media and trolling and whatever. So if that's a fact, then we realize what we are facing here. So we need academics to engage. We need to support those who do that. But of course, as when you're a young academic, you do your PhD, you basically have 5 or 10 years to survive as a postdoc and until you get a fixed position. And while you're in those years, you typically don't want to risk too much, and engaging in politics is a risky business. So that really explains why so many academics don't do this. So the whole system, the way it functions, really prevents this kind of engagement. But when you do it, it's rewarding. Personally, it's rewarding because you see you interact with people, and this is my first time here, and I really appreciate the kind of discussions that we have. I get a lot of information that I find useful for my students. We see the students come in to follow our courses, and they really want to do something useful in their lives. So if we can give them this kind of information, tell them what's happening, the kind of companies and the kind of initiatives that we see being discussed here, I think that's also a vision that I'd like to share with my students. So yeah,
but now it doesn't make sense. But will they change the system, or will they change the narrative about going about this?
So changing the system. If we can put this kind of mindset in the students when they start university, then they don't. I had to, I waited maybe too long. It took me like 20 years to kind of wake up and get engaged. If they can start doing this sooner, I think we're more likely to change the system. We see a lot of energy in the younger generation. We see the climate strikes and all of this. You can really feel that they have the will to move, to rock the boat. So I'm quite hopeful in that respect that things might change. And we also see signals from the universities. Some things are moving. Not as fast as we'd like, but internally there are all kinds of small or larger initiatives that you can see. We're 4 men here, and just having more women appointed as professors is a challenge, and partly because of what we just said, the publication, and you're basically selecting people who have a huge ego, right? The big alpha male, and so men typically are usually better at that, which leads to where we are. So we have to rethink, these values also.
Alpha women have been told, so it also exists. How would that look like in terms of soil health when you would work together with Benny and his farm, sort of would send out researchers?
Yeah, again, I think the first level where we can interact easily is for master students. We're always looking for cool projects for master students, and when you offer them a range of topics, they really often like to have something that's applied, so that they feel that what they're going to study is useful, and so potentially this could lead to a job. But even just the topic of the project, if they find it's useful, if they see that it's going to be useful for a farmer, I'm sure that they will pick up. And I've had examples of this kind of either for conservation of rare and endangered species or working on agricultural topics. So I'm confident that we could easily interact, and we already discussed about this. Like you say, yes, let's just imagine a few small projects that could then also be like preliminary research if we then want to scale it up to a full, bigger PhD project or something like that, for which then we need to seek funding. But smaller scale, one-year projects can be done at basically no cost, because you just have to fund a few cost of analyzers, and there's no salary involved, so that's easy to do. So I really like to reach out and say, yeah, I'm ready, and not just me, I'm sure a lot of colleagues in Berlin or wherever could be interested in this kind of research. Yeah.
I'd like to mention an example for how money is invested right now. I visited last week the Global Change Experimental Facility in Bad Lauchstädt, close to Halle in Sachsen-Anhalt, which is the world's biggest open-air laboratory to find out the effect of climate change on agricultural production systems. 250 researchers, or employees, it's not all professors, but a lot of professors, and a lot of very high-tech facilities to simulate climate change and all that. And they do it with plots where the system of production didn't change for the last 10 years. Which means they never tried what happens under conditions of what we heard this morning, agroforestry, for example. So this is a good example, because it shows how we stick to the old patterns instead of picking up what is already done in practice.
So we seem to have a case here between Neucha cooperation and let's see where this is going. I think what you just said, Felix, is I think a real big threat. And I say threat consciously because we understand we need to think in systems, but when we start thinking in systems, the old pattern very quickly draws us back. So how do we build up a discipline of not thinking in systems, besides the existing structures and those structures to be built in a different way in the future? I think this is like, you might have the master student that happily goes and work in the farm and will do a good master's or doctorate, but then again still torn into the system. How do we dissolve that? How do we develop that further? Any thoughts of that?
Again, I think there are a student who, for example, would start with a master's and then sees really the potential and understand what needs to be done. This could then lead to a PhD project, and then that student could then get his or her own funding and start a career in that field. And I think this is fertile ground, really. And we can talk about this as a good word maybe to use, but certainly it is. I'm pretty sure. And when I look at our university, we want to develop a new master's program in conservation, and so you look at the profiles of the people who apply for such a position, and you have a lot of traditional thinking, and so somebody who comes with a nice, fresh, very original new niche, and always in a country like Switzerland, you're always looking at what the other universities are doing, and so Neucha is a small university, we don't have as much money as the others, so if you can identify somebody who comes with a fresh new idea, that's great. That's exactly the kind of thing that you want. And many universities will see the potential for this as a profile. So yeah.
I would like to add a word of let's say carefulness, cautiousness, with regards to research when it comes to agriculture and land use, because we are talking about the most complex ecosystems that are just so incredibly heterogeneous. It can be only a couple of meters, right? And the things that we can find out or that we observe, they might not be applicable looking 2 years ahead, or 5 years ahead, or 10 years ahead. So there's only a limited room of scientific work, I guess, that can actually be really used. And I think what Felipe is doing, and I think what is the most crucial thing before we start thinking about technology, before we start thinking of gathering data and developing this and that, is to actually find different places across the world, different climatic zones, and initiate, role models or lighthouse projects or exemplary companies, agricultural plots that are trying regenerative farming, that are doing holistic management, that are doing agroforestry, regenerative agroforestry, to have a focus on that and have these hotspots where people come and feel and see and touch, and they can talk about it, they can have feeling for it. And I think this is even more crucial than many of the other things that we talk about, and this is why Felipe's work is so incredibly important.
Yeah, and also just to, you know, like, because it's very complex to, you know, like soil. Like, we're working directly in our scientific board with TKF20 students, which is like the top soil research university, and it's like they say they know nothing about soil still. So there's a lot of research still to go on soil and biodiversity, which is needed. So that's why we need to showcase the successful stories, so that we can build this data and this scientific research upon.
Marcello, you had a question?
So I have allow me to be a little bit provocative.
Please.
So I, nearly 40 years ago with my father, we started a company that started offering soil analysis. We did laboratory, we had small testing kits, and we did it for 15 years. And I was responsible for international sales. And we came from industry. So my father, the company was an industry, environmental industry, for industry. And we found it quite difficult in the agricultural space to innovate. I mean, and so we did a lot, but it was not so easy for farmers to embrace soil analysis. This is 40 years ago, 35 years ago, so things have changed. So this is one piece I want to say. The second thing I want to say is that, as I mentioned, you know, I started the B Corps in Europe. We have a company that is not a B Corp yet, that will become, it's called Kipster. So Kipster is a Dutch company that decided to completely disrupt the egg producing business. So they have these amazing farms that are state-of-the-art, super organic, LED or solar panels, everything is super clean, and they made a big deal with Lidl, and now they sell, you know, millions of eggs to Lidl. And so I'm joining these two things. One is, I think that we have to break out of this system's complexity, and the way to do this is by innovation. So farmers should be more innovative and more entrepreneurial. And this, for me, Kipster as the example of a company that has been able to do that. And I say this, I agree with everything that we said. It is complex, it includes all these parts, but having more innovation. And so my core is, how can we help farmers and everyone in the agricultural industry to also, because what Kipster did, they understood that actually the consumers wanted to have these kind of eggs, produced with renewable energy, super clean, super organic food, etc. So you have to also capture the consumer. So I'm saying the reality is that it is quite difficult to break out of the system, and how we can be innovative and bring the consumers with us. So, and I have other examples in the B Corp space of Patagonia Provisions. They created a whole new food company to actually do that. So we have to be able to win the consumers, be more innovative, etc.
But we have to be very careful on how we actually blame the farmer themselves. Because, I mean, a farmer is not deforesting because he wants to, or he's not degrading the soil because he wants to. So he's feeling this pressure around him to actually do the best he can. So, you know, we see now in Holland, for instance, the Dutch government saying, hey, you have to reduce the amount of cows, you have to reduce the amount of pesticides, and the farmers, they want to protest because they don't have options. The government doesn't offer suggestions of how to improve the agricultural systems. So we shouldn't really put all the blames on the farms, because they already have so much work to do to feed us that all the dinners we have here. So we really have to be careful on how we make statements about farmers in that respect.
Nor should we put all the blame on the consumer, because the consumer is acting in the same framework the farmer is acting in. And even though we will meet many farmers who are more open-minded and who change things, we will meet consumers who do that. But when we are talking about transition, how can we get to a really sustainable way of farming and eating, then we have to change the framework. And to give you an example, it is our role as organic farmers to develop methods to work without chemical pesticides. But then, in order to upscale that, it is necessary that those applying chemical pesticides are not allowed to put the majority of the costs they are causing on the public and on future generations. So we need both. We need those who develop the way to do it, and we need all the systems for upscaling all that, but we need the economic framework that makes it more rentable to protect nature than to destroy nature.
I would add that we also need to have the courage to change regulations. Because if you can't expect farmers to do the whole job, you can't expect consumers to do the whole job. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that economic wisdom, or whatever you want to call it, is going to make the systems change completely. I think we need at some point to ask the right question. Do we really want this or not? Are they taboos that we just want to say, okay, synthetic pesticides are not needed, we just don't want to use them anymore, period. No, we don't even need to say, why should it be more expensive? Just at some point say, no, we just don't want this anymore.
I would like to add one consideration also, because at least in the sort of the bubble that I'm familiar with, farmers are in a very particular situation. So you can kind of split them between those in our area, for example, where we have just really incredibly tough environment. They are fighting for their farm and their families every day. That's what they're doing. So Volker Engelsmann, the CEO of Klosters, which I look up to very much, always says, "How can you think green if your figures are red?" So that is one situation, and that is there's a lot of farmers around us. Then you have a different group that has a good soil and the right amount of rain. They're earning quite a bit of money, and they're getting some subsidies on top of that, quite likely. So they are not going to change. They might change when it comes to future generations, when they're going to take over. This is a different discussion. And then in the middle part, and this is also a big part, you have many farmers that are kind of stuck in the system. Right? They have been driven into a system where they were told, specialize, invest in that. And the bank doesn't care if you suddenly want to be giving more animal husbandry, or you want to be more sustainable in some sense, because they want their annuity back and they want it regularly. So this is the kind of situations or the kind of structures that our farmers are in. And then on top of that, all of us who are here, we want more sustainability. We want animals to be treated better. We want equality. We want all of these things, which, to be honest with you, only farmers can provide. So farmers are the people worldwide that are providing the food, and they're looking after our approach and our wanting of the earth. And at the same time, the only thing that we're offering them is, you can buy this product, or you can buy this service, or I give you some advice and you can pay for it. Do you know what I mean? So this is a system that is fundamentally wrong, to be honest with you. So I think we have to really think about all the large structures around it, and that is financing, that is regulation. And I think the most important part for this sort of transitional period is to make sure that we don't lose touch with the farmers. So we have to acknowledge what they have already done and where they're coming from. And as Felipe correctly said, they're not doing this on purpose. They have been driven into it. So I think we have to really also change our way of talking about them and with them, and open up for having that possibility to also bring them along. Because to be honest with you, if you've done something 30 years which you thought it was right, and then suddenly some young cool kid with a cap comes and says, "Oh, wait, it's wrong what you've been doing, and this is a cool new way," you'd be like, "What do you want? You have no clue," right? So we have to be much more inclusive, I think, when we talk about this solution.
So it's about reconnect. Yeah, just hear that. How do we reconnect? How do we connect well with people who provide the food for us? But also how we start changing the frameworks and the structure in a way that it doesn't collapse at once, but like slowly going into a new way of doing it. Hendrik has a question, so we're opening up a little bit, and then Steve, and then who? And then I have a question to Felipe still, just because he just...
Just one question and reflection on Felipe. This is not either or, this is both. One of the things that I'm missing in this conversation, and I think we have talked about it, and we had in our presentation before, collaterals. We hear, for example, about egg. There's no world without farmers. There's no world without biodiversity. There is no world about this hyper $1 million installation in Holland doing whatever, B Corp egg. And there is nothing without Just, who is launching egg based on plant-based. So one of the things we need to have into the equation is this collateral where we start saying, hey, it's actually both. We all need to be here, and we all need to collaborate together, and we all need to make a system where there is space for all the different egg variants, from the guy that have the 2 chickens to the guy that have the 200 chickens, to the guy that invents some whatever farm that he can invest 100 billion because this is his passion, or to just Tetrick, who is launching egg in a plant-based investigation of 30,000 species. So every time I hear these kind of, let's say, isolated conversations, I'm missing, let's say, all this other part, and we can only do that by using digitalization and new technologies to at least put things into a perspective, so we are all heard in a certain way. So
I agree. Like every stakeholder is very important in this equation. I totally agree with you.
I would like just. I'm observing something here, and I want to make a difference between percentages and absolute numbers. Maybe 2% of academics are willing to be transdisciplinary and close to practice. You happen to have 2 in the room, right? Maybe 2% of farmers are willing to be regenerative or to experiment in that direction. Maybe 2% of corporates and 2% of governments. But you do not want to work with 1,000 academics. You only have to find 2. And there are hundreds who are willing to be transdisciplinary, and the same for farmers. So the problem isn't the 99%. The problem is, how do you find the 1%? The search routine that allows you to find the ones who are the sorts of people you want to work with. And I was given advice a long time ago by a wise person who said, only work with people whose soul is bigger than their debts. And that's what you're looking for in everyone around you, in all of those systems. You're looking for people who see purpose. This is not a hard thing to search for, honestly. I can see people with purpose in front of us now, right? You're people I would work with. This is not hard, go and find them. And I'd like to make a second point, which is for all of those groups, they struggle to conduct experiments in a safe way. Politicians don't like taking risks. Corporates don't like taking risks. Farmers don't like taking risks. They've got to pay the bills. And the same with academics. The question, the institutional question, I'm really glad you brought up that point. How do we build institutions that encourage people to take risks and make it safe for them to try new ideas without, as we call it, betting the farm?
Will you react to that, Felix? Or?
Yeah, I still stick to the fact that we need both. We need those who develop the solutions for the future. And when I understood you right, this is what you were talking about. We need, of course, people who invest money in those people and in their solutions. But in the end, maybe the whole food system is the most dependent system we have from public influence, which is not amazing because we as farmers are influencing public goods much more than anybody else. So it is up to the public to make sure that we don't make bad use of these public goods. And my point is that we are destroying these public goods in a speed that is really catastrophic. We look out of that window and we say, oh, how beautiful everything is, and you can travel all over Germany and look out and see, it's all green. Even it's even green at your place sometimes. but if you look closer, you see we lost 3/3 of our insects, which is just one part of biodiversity, and which is continues up to the birds and down to the microbes in the soils. So we are losing our very future. So we cannot wait for the consumers. We cannot wait for the for those who decide because there's a label on a product. We need all those for the change, but in the end, we need the frameworks. come back to that. And there's many different ways to change that framework. We are talking about the institutions. We are talking about the regulations. We can talk about setting economic incentives that give people more chance who do the right thing. But the thing is, actually, that does not happen. The European Union spends 40% of its budget to agriculture. The money they spend for farmers represents 16% of the gross income of the farmers. And all that money doesn't change anything, or almost anything. And this is the discussion we are having right now, this day. We will have a new CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, from next year on. The decisions are made now, all over Europe, and it is very important we sit here and think about all the open-minded solutions, but we have to go out there and to force our politicians to change framework.
Felipe, I haven't forgotten you, and most of the people in the room know you. You're the founder of reNature, and then you put a lot of the green back into the room because your passion is agroforestry. I'd like to ask you a slightly different question, because we're about the transition as well as the systems and how do you change the frameworks. You talk a lot to corporates who also want to engage with you because they see they can learn either with the project that you establish or even offset some of their CO2. What did you experience with this breed, with this corporate breed, in terms of making this transition viable and understandable for them?
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, you're talking about the 1% people who is already aware and wants to, has the willingness. So we created a buying persona called Steve in reNature, and the Steve is a family, or it has a family. It's either a man or a woman that has kids and cares about the planet, but is working inside a corporate. And this person cares so much about the planet that he opens doors inside the organization for us to do an intervention. And this person is coming from Rabobank, is coming from Danone, is coming from Tony Chocoloni. So a lot of companies have individuals that wants to achieve change inside organizations. So Steve is the person that we're directly in contact, that is actually moving mountains inside organization for us to scale such systems with the corporates. Because in the end, they're the ones who has the huge supply chain. Yes, you can go scale regenerative by initiatives, but we also have to think in cooperatives, in association of farmers, in supply chain from corporates. So this Steve is this person that we created, that it has the purpose to do good inside the organizations, and then we're trying to figure out who are the Steves and how can we best approach to them to build bridges and dialogue instead of no, I don't want to work with this company. It's about being open and exchange knowledge, because there's individuals working in these organizations. So just because they probably harmed the planet in the past, who are we to say we're going to exclude them from the ecosystem? Back in the past, they had to deforest a lot of forests, excluding all the biodiversity in that ecosystem. And if we do the same now, it's just making the same mistake. And Einstein already told us to not do that. So we have to include corporates who have damage in that equation, and then bringing the Steves to make this activation inside. So yeah, that's how we work with corporates and finding the right Steves.
I like the Steves. And you have a success story there, so already achieved?
Yeah, one of the Steves from Rabobank is working with us now.
Super.
Yeah, there was a Steve from Shell, but we said no.
Okay.
And then, even though it's the nature-based solution, but it's no, let's not keep this way.
There was a question over there, and then the women have the right to ask questions.
Thank you very much. I heard many very interesting things. I think so. We totally agree that there's many solutions, and I think so. The solution is to will come from science, consumer, politics, etc. And that's the reason why it's so important, finally, to have a framework. and rules. Because actually the idea is to let the economic, the creativity, the scientists, the farmers free, develop their own creativity and so on. But as in a game, you have rules. When you play tennis or golf, you have rules. But everybody can play with a different style and like this, you know. And we need every country, Europe, worldwide, rules to define, okay, this is the cape, this is the direction. So everybody knows, okay, we're gonna invest there, we're gonna invest here, and this is absolutely important. And that's what we try to do in Switzerland. It's not to, I mean, of course, it's a kind of, it's a positive rule because it makes sense, and it's very important that the democracy, you know, it must be democratic rules. But it's what we try to do in Switzerland. It's to say, okay, stop pesticide, and in this frame, do what you want. Be creative, voila. Because we know this is for the most of the people good.
Thank you. You want to react to that? I know any of you?
Maybe just a point, like, you know, when you're talking about rules, and you're talking about policymakers, I actually have to agree sometimes on what you're saying. Sometimes you have to be politically incorrect, because, for instance, like there was another, you know, like in Holland, it's not allowed to plant and have silver pasture. For like the biggest land use in Holland is dairy, and actually it's not allowed to plant trees in agricultural land in the Netherlands. Now, by having a successful silver pasture system using trees for dairy, is showing the government of Netherlands that it's actually much more efficient to give nutrient intake from trees than actually bringing soybean from Brazil. So, you know, like sometimes you have to also break, you know, find a way to not go so much into the rules of the place, trying to show solutions by showcasing, and then convincing by the example to the policymakers and making new rules. And also, policymakers, they're actually not, they are not feeling the pain of climate change because they don't have crops that they grow. So they don't have a business model depending on the crop increase. Like companies like Nespresso, they are coming to us saying, hey, we are not going to have coffee in 5 years from now because our coffee is being produced in Cerrado in Brazil and it's decreasing the yield dramatically because of the climate change effects. So they feel the pain. Chocolate companies, private sector, they are moving much faster than actually policymakers. Policymakers, they will be puppies following what the private sector is doing. So we really have to work with corporates to create showcases and then invite the policymakers to join this.
Just one quick thing is that the time frame of what we're talking about is important. Part of my research focuses on paleoecology, and there I'm going back into paleoecology. So I'm going back in time 1,000, 10,000 years. And now we talk about sustainability, but when we do that, we have like 10 years, 20 years, 50 years in mind. So I'd like us to think about how do you define sustainability? I would say 1,000 years without any significant decline in biodiversity, soil fertility, or human health. Now, good luck.
It's met somebody who told me if we are talking about sustainable agriculture, it must be aware of farming that can last for the next 10,000 years. And why 10,000 is because we are farming since 10,000 years. And of course we couldn't accept an horizon shorter than that. And I totally agree with you. And I'd like to give an example on a clever way how one could change a framework. We have in Germany we have federal states, and in the state of Schleswig-Holstein the agricultural minister was called Robert Habeck. That's a guy who is now presiding the Green Party in Germany. And he asked the Helmholtz-Zentrum für Umweltforschung in Leipzig to design a model for a pesticide tax. And they designed it, and the idea was to add to the price of pesticides according to their toxicity. Thank you. Very difficult word. Toxicity. And then this whole thing was published. It was very funny. I read then Top Agrar, which is the leading agricultural journal, and on 3 pages they condemned what they had developed there. What a crazy idea, and it will ruin all the farms and all that. And the interesting thing was in the last 10% of that article. But if that comes, how should we react? It was very funny because you had all the reactions we would need, all. Just because they saw when pesticides are much more expensive, then we cannot continue like we did up to now. And my suggestion is to combine that idea with another idea that had been brought up last year by something like 3,500 American economic professors of economics, who suggested to have a carbon tax of $300 per ton, collect that money and give it back per capita to the American population. So you have very little costs of administrating that money. And you have, by the way, a social program because rich people are producing much more carbon than poor people, so that will be a transfer. And the same thing would apply to pesticides. Those who use much and toxic pesticides would subsidize those who don't. And you would have immediate reactions. The whole industry producing machines that can replace herbicides, they would invest like mad. And within 2, 3, 4 years, you would have all these solutions that would make these herbicides unnecessary, and so on. I think you could have immediate reactions by doing such a thing, which is not really very difficult to do.
We have time for 2 more questions. That will be Jane, and who was first?
Jane.
Yeah, Jane was first, and then.
Thanks. So, going back a little bit again, sorry. We talked about the complexity of the system and the diversity of all the different stakeholders. And our Steve in the room actually quite nicely said that there is willingness for inter and transdisciplinary work. And so my question is, what do you, Edward, do you have experience with, what's it called, citizen science projects? And to the farmers, do you have experience with having consumers working with you? So there's different projects on community-supported agriculture. What's your experience? What's your take on those?
I can be very quick. Yeah, we did some citizen science project. Myself and my closest collaborator in my lab, professor, he does even more than me. He's half anthropology, half biology, so he's really bridged in the two. Myself, my biggest impact paper is a paper on neonicotinoid contamination in honeys of the world, and that was done by just analyzing honey samples that were brought back from all over the world by citizens. So people, friends and colleagues and Swiss people traveled all over the world. So very quickly we had samples from everywhere. We analyzed them. We had the map, 75% of contamination in the world. So science loved it, and it was a huge paper. So the sad thing for me is that this is my biggest hit in science, and this is really not my core business.
I just want to share some experience that I had of working with scientists and the food systems. And the biggest trend I saw, because I resonate with everything you said about researchers, they get their evaluation based on how many papers they publish. And people like you that are spending time here, you're not writing, you're losing a lot of input that you could become more senior in your role as well. So the things that I've seen as a change is private funds, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they are more and more pushing for every research they fund must be a business improvement. And this is, I think, was the most crucial thing that has been happening in the past years in terms of research, is that we got researchers going coming to us, my role was to teach them how to speak the language of businesses, how to work in the speed of businesses, because they're like, I need a grant, but I need to work with a company. Like, so how do I do? And companies on the other side will come into me crazy, like, I need data. But these scientists are driving me crazy because they think that I can have 3 years for that. And they want to like measure everything, I don't have the time. So the thing that I want to share is there is a way that they communicate, but that demands a lot of sympathy to each other, because also I had researchers saying, I will never work with Nestle because they make so much money. But hang on, we also want a salary being paid. So I think that we need sympathy. And the other thing I want to ask you, Felix, is that how much there is space for this in other countries, because you're here in Germany, because I saw Denmark doing a lot of that. So they started to pick up on this example of the private foundations, and they now also demand now. USA is starting to do that. So I've never seen anything from Germany asking for researchers to work with businesses. Maybe I'm just not informed.
You have never, didn't get the last sentence.
So I never saw any grant publication from Germany saying that researchers can only get grants if they work with businesses.
We do have programs of that kind even. No, that happens. But I have to admit that I'm quite skeptical when it comes to agricultural research with business. Because most of the businesses associating with agricultural research have an interest in agriculture, of course, which means they have something to sell. Yeah. And their interest is not to find solutions where they can't sell things anymore. So, of course, if you associate research with business, you will get more practical solutions. That's the advantage. But you also get dependency. And especially the kind of solutions we need, are solutions which can work without external inputs. And solutions without external inputs are completely without interest to companies. And this is why we have, in the contrary, we have to have scientific institutions that do not depend on third-party money, to make them free to look out for solutions, that don't need input. And we do not have that. I mean, I guess you will agree that that it is the peer-reviewed journals are important, the citations are important, and how much money you get from third parties are important for your scientific career. And this is a big problem in agricultural research.
Yeah, science should always be neutral. And that's what happens when business gets involved. You know, like Wagner is funded by Felix Prinz, so you know it's really easy to influence on what kind of like data that you can collect. So it's difficult, but I do think you have to think of this kind of ways to access funding for the right kind of research. But which kind of business is behind, or what's the interest behind? So that's questions to ask ourselves.
I just want to remind one thing. Oh, please.
I was going to cut you off there, but so
I just want to say I got this all the time, Felix, and I sympathize so much with that. But I also want to remember farmers are also businessmen. So I think farmers are businessmen, farmers are consumers. So by partnering with a farmer is also a risk, because maybe the solution is not going to be the cheapest. So, you know, I just want to trigger some discussions, because I think the more we bring different people together, the more we find solutions. And I absolutely agree you need to be independent. So you need to set up indicators where you are able to publish everything you find out. So,
thank you.
I just wanted to go back to your question, because you actually asked, you know, how we actually also involve with consumers. And I think, you know, what is really something that we constantly do and think about, and something that can have quite a bit of influence, is not to focus the discussion on the bad things and all of this and then nitrogen leaching. And we all know that I can't hear it anymore. Let's talk about the potential. Let's talk about the beauty. Let's talk about what we can achieve, because we can, right? And this is something that I experience every day on the farm. Like, we've had, during Corona times, we had to plant agroforestry systems, which we were doing with our partners like Dr. Bonas and Patagonia, but they couldn't obviously supply any people anymore. So we did like a public outreach to have volunteers come and help us. The plan was to plant 10,000 trees in an agroforestry system. They spent 3 weeks with us. We started with 4, in the end it was 38 people. They didn't leave anymore. They planted 10,000 trees, 100,000 tree seeds, 10,000 potatoes, 300 blackcurrants, and they are still connected to the farm. They still come on a regular basis. And we are far further in a sense of the outlook and the knowledge of the people, especially the young people, the generation that's coming up. They are so incredibly smart. They know what's going on. They want to change something. So we are. It's all not that bad. And I think we are much more efficient at changing and transitioning, or asking, or trying to involve people in the transition phase, not by pointing the finger and saying do this and don't do this, but to say do something that is so great and that is fun and that is something that's happening there, that people come and they go, what are you guys doing? I want some of that. This is, I think, is really important to have that positive note also in discussion. So sorry about that.